That was too much for them, and they calmed down. In the end, of course, they had to do just what Bilbo suggested, because it was obviously impossible for them to try and find their way into the upper halls, or to fight their way out of the gates that closed by magic. And it was no good grumbling in the passages until they were caught again. So, following the Hobbit down into the lowest cellars, they crept. They passed a door through which the chief guard and the butler could be still seen happily snoring with smiles upon their faces. The line of Dorwinion brings deep and pleasant dreams. There would be a different expression on the face of the chief guard next day, even though Bilbo, before they went on, stole in and kind-heartedly put the keys back on his belt. "That will save him some of the trouble he is in for," said Mr. Baggins to himself. "He wasn't a bad fellow, and quite a decent to the prisoners. It will puzzle them all, too. They will think we had a very strong magic to pass through all those locked doors and disappear." Disappear! We have got to get busy very quick if that is to happen. Balin was told off to watch the guard and the butler and given warning if they stirred. The rest went into the adjoining cellar with the trapdoors. There was little time to lose. Before long, as Bilbo knew, some elves were under orders to come down and help the butler get the empty barrels through the doors into the stream. These were in fact already standing in rows in the middle of the floor waiting to be pushed off. Some of them were wine barrels, and these were not much use, as they could not easily be opened at the end without a deal of noise, nor could they be easily secured again. But among them were several others which had been used for bringing other stuffs, butter, apples, all sort of things, to the king's palace. They soon found 13 with room enough for a dwarf in each. In fact, some were too roomy, and as they climbed in, the dwarves thought anxiously of the shaking and the bumping they would get inside, though Bilbo did his best to find straw and other stuff to pack them in as cozily as could be managed in a short time. At last the 12 dwarves were stowed. Thorin had given a lot of trouble, and turned and twisted in his tub and grumbled like a large dog in a small kennel, while Balin, who came last, made a great fuss about his air holes, and said he was stifling, even before his lid was on. Bilbo had done what he could to close holes in the sides of the barrels, and to fix on all the lids as safely as could be managed, and now he was left alone again, running round putting the finishing touches to the packing, and hoping against hope his plan would come off. It had not been a bit too soon. Only a minute or two after Balin's lid had been fitted on, there came the sound of voices and the flicker of lights. A number of elves came laughing and talking into the cellars and singing snatches of song. They had left a merry feast in one of the halls and were bent on returning as soon as they could. "Where's old Gallion the butler?" said one. "I haven't seen him at the tables tonight. He ought to be here now to show us what is to be done." "I shall be angry if the slow coach is late," said another. "I have no wish to waste time down here while the song is up." "Ha ha!" came a cry. "Here's the old villain with his head on a jug. He's been having a little feast all to himself, and his friend's the captain." "Shake him! Wake him!" shouted the others impatiently. Gallion was not at all pleased at being shaken or wakened, and still less at being laughed at. "You're all late," he grumbled. "Here I am waiting down here while you fellows drink and make merry and forget your tasks. Small wonder if I fall asleep from weariness." "Small wonder," they said, "when the explanation stands close at hand in a jug. Come, give us a taste of your sleeping draught before we fall to. No need to wake the turnkey yonder. He has had his share by the looks of it." Then they drank once round and became mighty merry all of a sudden, but they did not quite lose their wits. "Save us, Gallion!" cried some. "You began your feasting early and muddled your wits. You have stacked some full casks here instead of the empty ones, if there is anything in weight." "Get on with the work," growled the butler. "There's nothing in the feeling of weight in an idle tosspot's arms. These are the ones to go, and no others. Do as I say." Very well, they answered, rolling the barrels to the opening. "On your head be it if the king's full butter tubs and his best wine is pushed into the river for the lake men to feast on, or for nothing." "Roll, roll, 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 rolling down the hole. Heave, ho, splash, pump. Down they go, down they bump." So they sang, as first one barrel and then another rumbled to the dark opening and was pushed over to the cold water, some feet below. Some were barrels really empty, Some were tubs neatly packed with a dwarf each, but down they went, one after another, with many a clash and a bump, thudding on top of ones below, smacking into the water, jostling against the walls of the tunnel, knocking into one another, and bobbing away down the current. It was just at this moment that Bilbo suddenly discovered the weak point in his plan. Most likely you saw it some time ago and have been laughing at him, but I don't suppose you would have done half as well of yourselves in his place. Of course he was not in a barrel himself, nor was there anyone to pack him in, even if there had been a chance. It looked as if he would certainly lose his friends this time. Nearly all of them had already disappeared through the dark trap door, and get utterly left behind and have to stay lurking as a permanent burglar in the elves' caves forever. For even if he could have escaped through the upper gates at once, he had a precious small chance of ever finding the dwarves again. He did not know the way by land to the place where the barrels were collected. He wondered what on earth would happen to them without him, for he had not had time to tell the dwarves at all that he learned, or what he had meant to do once they were out of the wood. While all these thoughts were passing through his mind, the elves began to sing a song around the river door. Some had already gone to haul on the ropes which pulled up the portcullis at the water gate so as to let out the barrels as soon as they were all afloat below. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to land you once did know. Leave the halls and caverns deep, leave the northern mountains steep, where the forest wide and dim stoops to shadow gray and grim. Float beyond the world of trees, out into the whispering breeze, past the rushes, past the reeds, past the marshes waving weeds, through the mist that relish white, up from mere and pool at night. Follow, follow stars that leap up the heavens cold and steep. Turn when dawn comes over land, over rapid, over sand. South the way and south the way, seek the sunlight and the day. Back to pasture, back to mead, where the kine and oxen feed. Back to gardens on the hills, where the berry swells and fills. Under sunlight, under day, south the way and south the way. Down the swift dark stream you go, back to lands you once did know. Now the very black barrel was being rolled to the doors. In despair and not knowing what else to do, poor little Bilbo caught hold of it and was pushed over the edge with it. Down into the water he fell, splash, into the cold, dark water with the barrel on top of him. He came up again spluttering and clinging to the wood like a rat, but for all his efforts he could not scramble on top. Every time he tried, the barrel rolled round and ducked under him again. It was really empty and floated like a cork. Though his ears were full of water, he could hear the elves still singing in the cellar above. Then suddenly the trap doors fell to with a boom and their voices faded away. He was in the dark tunnel, floating in icy water all alone, for you cannot count friends that are all packed up in barrels. Very soon a gray patch came up in the darkness ahead. He heard the creak of the water gate being hauled up, and he found that he was in the midst of a bobbing and bumping mass of casks and tubs all pressing together to pass under the arch and get out into the open street. He had as much as he could to prevent himself from being hustled and battered to bits, but at last the jostling crowd began to break up and swing off one by one under the stone arch and away. Then he saw that it would have been no good even if he had managed to get astride his barrel, for there was no room to spare, not even for a hobbit between its top and the suddenly stooping roof where the gate was. Out they went under the overhanging branches of the trees on either bank. Bilbo wondered what the dwarves were feeling and whether a lot of water was getting into their tubs. Some of those that bobbed along by him in the gloom seemed pretty low in the water, and he guessed that these had dwarves inside. I do hope I put the lids on tight enough, he thought. But before long he was worrying too much about himself to remember the dwarves. He managed to keep his head above the water, but he was shivering with the cold, and he saw James Bond coming down the river! Wrong. Wondered if he would die of it before the luck turned, and how much longer he would be able to hang on, and whether he should just risk the chance of letting go and trying to swim to the bank. The luck turned all right before long. The eddying current carried several barrels close ashore at one point, and there for a while they stuck against some hidden root. Then Bilbo took the opportunity of scrambling up the side of his barrel while it was held steady against another. Up he crawled like a drowned rat, and lay on top, spread out to keep the balance as best he could. The breeze was cold, but better than the water, and he hoped he would suddenly roll off again where they started off once more. Before long, the barrels broke free again and turned and twisted down the stream and out into the main current. Then he found it quite as difficult to stick on as his beard, but he managed it somehow, though it was miserably uncomfortable. Luckily, he was very light, and the barrel was a good big one, and being rather leaky, had now shipped a small amount of water. All the same, it was like trying to ride without bridle or stirrups a round-bellied pony that was always thinking of rolling in the grass. In this way, at last, Mr. Baggins came to a place where the trees on either hand grew thinner. He could see the paler sky between them. The dark river opened suddenly wide, and there it was joined to the main water of the forest river flowing down in haste from the king's great doors. There was a dim sheet of water no longer overshadowed, and on its sliding surface there was dancing and broken reflections of clouds and stars. Then the hurrying water of the forest river swept all the company of casks and tubs away to the north bank, in which it had eaten out a wide bay. This had a shingly shore under hanging banks, and was walled at the eastern end by a little jutting cape of hard rock. On the shallow shore most of the barrels ran aground, though a few went on to bump against the stony pier. There were people on the lookout on the banks. They quickly poled and pushed all the barrels together into the shallows, and when they had counted them, they roped them together and left them till the morning. Poor dwarves! Bilbo was not so badly off now. He slipped from his barrel and waded ashore, and then sneaked along to some huts that he could see near the water's edge. He no longer thought twice about picking up a supper uninvited if he got the chance. He had been obliged to do it for so long, and he only knew, too, so well, it was to be really hungry, not merely politely interested in the dainties of a well-filled larder. Also, he had caught a glimpse of a fire through the trees, and that appealed to him with his dripping and ragged clothes clinging to him as cold and clammy. There is no need to tell you much of his adventures that night, for now we are drawing near to the end of the eastward journey, and coming to the last and greatest adventure, so we must hurry on. Of course, helped by his magic ring, he got on very well at first, but he was given away in the end by his wet footsteps and the trail of drippings that he left wherever he went or sat. And also he began to snivel, and whenever he tried to hide, he was found out by the terrific explosions of his suppressed sneezes. Very soon there was a fine commotion in the village by the riverside, but Bilbo escaped into the woods, carrying a loaf and a leather bottle of wine and a pie that did not belong to him. The rest of the night he had to pass wet, as he was and far from a fire, but the bottle helped him do that, and he actually dozed a little on some dry leaves, even though the year was getting late and the air was chilly. He woke again with a specially loud sneeze. It was already gray morning, and there was a merry racket down by the river. They were making up a raft of barrels, and the raft elves would soon be steering it off down the stream to Lake Town. Bilbo sneezed again. He was no longer dripping, but he felt cold all over. He scrambled down as fast as his stiff legs would take him, and managed just in time to get on the mast of casks without being noticed in the general bustle. Luckily, there was no sun at the time, to cast an awkward shadow, and for a mercy he did not sneeze again for a good while. There was a mighty pushing of poles. The elves that were standing in the shallow water heaved and shoved. The barrels, now all lashed together, creaked and fretted. "This is a heavy load," some grumbled. "They float too deep. Some of these are never empty. If they had come ashore in the daylight, we might have had a look inside," they said. "No time now," cried the Rathine. "Shove off!" And off they went at last, slowly at first, until they had passed the point of rock where the other elves stood to fend them off with poles, and then quicker and quicker as they caught the main stream and went sailing down, down towards the lake. They had escaped the dungeons of the king, and were through the wood, but whether alive or dead still remains to be seen. Wow, look at that. It leaves you with a perfect little question. Are they alive? Are they dead? We do have a lot of the book left, so, there might be a good guess there. I don't know. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Go ahead and do your after-chapter questions, and we are on to Chapter 10, A Warm Welcome. Ooh, that sounds fun and nice. All right, guys. See you soon.